Welcome to the Parsha Themes Shir. It's Parshas Mishpatim, and there's also a special Shabbos that we read the Parsha of Shekalim as well at the end, so there's a little bit of that at the end. And it's for the Refuah Shalema of Moshe Shimon ben Leah Esther Chaya HaLevi. So we start, theme 1 is the Sinai foundation for all the mitzvos. Ve'ela ha-mishpatim asher tosim lifneichem. And these are the laws or ordinances that you should set before them. But why is the conjunctive word and used here? The phrase and these, ve'ela, implies that they are a continuation of what is written before. This is to teach us that just as the laws written above, in other words, the 10 Commandments are from Sinai, these too are also from Sinai. Also, since the majority of laws set forth in the Parsha of Mishpatim are logical laws, the Torah wishes to emphasize that these too are divinely ordained. There are those who believe that what is holy in Judaism is its broad vision, never so compellingly expressed as in the 10 Commandments at Sinai. The truth, however, is that God is in the details. Just as the former were given at Sinai, so these were given at Sinai. The greatness of Judaism is not simply in its noble vision of a free, just, and compassionate society, but in the way it brings this vision down to earth in detailed legislation. So why start with the laws of the servant? Ki sikna eved ivri, if you purchase a Hebrew slave, says the Torah. There is nothing more difficult for a person than to be subjugated to another person. This is one reason why the Parsha begins with the laws of how the Hebrew slave is to be treated. Also, the law that the Hebrew slave must be set free in the 7th year is reminiscent of the exodus from Egypt referred to in the first of the 10 Commandments. As the Torah says regarding the Hebrew slave, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this thing today, it says in Deuteronomy. It is also reminiscent of the work of creation, because like the Shabbat, the 7th year is when the Hebrew slave gains respite from serving his master. All time cycles are ordained as cycles of 7, to refer to the 7-day cycle of creation. Thus it is fitting that this mitzvah should come first in our Parsha. That's the Ramban. Also, ideologically, freedom is more than an abstract idea. It means letting a slave go free after 7 years or immediately if his master has injured him. It means granting slaves complete rest and freedom 1 day in 7. These laws do not abolish slavery, but they do create the conditions under which people will eventually learn to abolish it. No less importantly, they turn slavery from an existential fate to a temporary condition. Slavery is not what you are or how you were born, but something that has happened to you for a while and from which you will one day be liberated. Now the servant who doesn't want freedom. So if after the fixed period of 6 days he doesn't want to go free, his master shall bore his ear through with an awl against the door. Why the ear? The ear that heard at Mount Sinai, for the children of Israel are my servants, yet this person went and acquired a human master for himself. That ear should be pierced, says Rashi. It's obviously not at all ideal to have a master other than HaShem. Now, the civil law is not secular law. We do not believe in the idea render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what belongs to God. We believe in the separation of powers, but not in the secularization of law or the spiritualization of faith. The Sanhedrin or Supreme Court must be placed near the temple to teach that law itself must be driven by a religious vision. The greatest of these visions, stated in this week's Parsha, is, do not oppress a stranger. You know what it is to be a stranger, for you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. The Jewish vision of justice, given its detailed articulation here for the first time, is based not on expediency or pragmatism, nor even on abstract philosophical principles, but on the concrete historical memories of the Jewish people as one nation under God. Centuries earlier, God had chosen Abraham so that he would teach his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. That's from Bereshis. Justice in Judaism flows from the experience of injustice at the hands of the Egyptians and the God-given challenge to create a radically different form of society in Israel. This is already foreshadowed in the first chapter of the Torah with its statement of the equal and absolute dignity of the human person as the image of God. That is why society must be based on the rule of law, impartially administered, treating all alike. Lo siyeh achrei rabim. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd, the majority, and do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. To be sure, at the highest levels of mysticism, God is to be found in the innermost depths of the human soul. But God is equally to be found in the public square and in the structures of society, the marketplace, the corridors of power, and courts of law. There must be no gap, no dissociation of sensibilities between the court of justice, which is the meeting place of man, and the temple being the meeting place of man and God. Now, universal knowledge of the law. Law does not belong to lawyers, it is the heritage of every Jew. Rashi wrote, "Do you think I will teach them a section or law 2 or 3 times until they know the words verbatim, but I will not take the trouble to make them understand the reason and significance of the law?" The Torah states that you shall set before them like a fully laid table with everything ready for eating. This is the origin of the name of the most famous of all Jewish codes of law, Rabbi Yosef Karo's Shulchan Aruch, the laid table. From earliest times, Judaism expected everyone to know and understand the law. Legal knowledge is not the closely guarded property of an elite. Rather, it is the heritage of the congregation of Yaakov. Already in the 1st century CE, Josephus could write that should any of our nation be asked about our laws, he will repeat them as readily as his own name. The result of our thorough education in our laws from the very dawn of intelligence is that they are, as it were, engraved on our souls. Hence, to break them is rare, and no one can evade punishment by the excuse of ignorance. That is why there are so many Jewish lawyers. Judaism is a religion of law, not because it does not believe in love. After all, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God," and "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," but rather because without justice, neither love nor liberty nor human life itself can flourish. Love alone does not free a slave from his or her chains. The Parsha of Mishpatim, with its detailed rules and regulations, can sometimes seem a letdown after the breathtaking grandeur of the revelation at Sinai. It should not be. Parshas Yisro contains the vision, the 10 Commandments, but God is in the details. Without the vision, law is blind, but without the details, the vision floats in heaven. With the details, the divine presence is brought down to earth where we need it most. Now, the sin of cruelty. Lo savashel gedi b'chalev imo. You must not eat a young animal cooked in its mother's milk. Cooking a young animal in its mother's milk is an act of consummate cruelty. The Torah therefore forbids us not only to cook a young animal in its mother's milk, but to cook any animal in any other animal's milk, to eat such a mixture, or even to derive any other benefit from it. We see here what extremes the Torah goes to in forbidding cruelty towards animals. The precautions the Torah takes to distance us from causing suffering to an animal demonstrate how much more so we must take care to avoid causing suffering to a fellow human being. Now, helping with animals. The Pasuk says, "Ki sirach hamor sona'acho rovetz tachas masa'o, azoiv ta'azoiv imo." When you see your enemy's donkey crouching under its load, you must help him. The priority is to help an enemy's animal before a friend's. The reason is that by overcoming our negative feelings towards our enemy by a positive action, our negative attitude towards him will, God willing, change. Homiletically, God gave us the Torah and its commandments for the benefit of our bodies as well as our souls. Nonetheless, since the body our beast of burden or donkey naturally seeks its own comfort, it is likely to consider the study of God's Torah and the fulfillment of his commandments a burden. It may rebel or crouch, positioning itself as the soul's enemy. Therefore, since for most of us our body's voice is louder than our souls, we are likely to initially view the Torah as an oppressive burden. This only means, however, that we have not yet integrated the Torah into our lives. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov taught that we should not despise the body because of its natural attitude. Rather, we should work with it, strengthening its health while educating it to realize that accepting the Torah's dictates is in its own best interest. Once we realize that God's Torah and his commandments are the truest source of life, our bodies will view them as a gift, joining our souls enthusiastically in their fulfillment. Now, Hashgacha Pratis, so God who controls the entire world, v'asher lo tzada v'ha'elokim ina liyadoi. If a man did not lie in wait to kill, but God caused it to come to his hand, I will appoint for you a place to which he shall flee. When it says that God caused it to come to his hand, the Torah is talking about the case of two people who had killed, one in error and another with intent, there being no witnesses to either, so that neither receives his prescribed penalty from a human court. In such a case, God arranges that they meet at the same inn, for example. The one who killed with intent sits under the ladder, and the one who had killed in error comes down the ladder, falls and kills him in the presence of witnesses. Thus, appropriately, the one who had killed with intent is slain, while the one who had killed in error is now exiled. So a person who damages, if men fight together and one strikes another with a stone or with his fist, a person is always liable for damage he causes, whether inadvertently or willfully, whether awake or asleep. If he blinded his neighbor's eye or broke his belongings, full compensation must be made. Justice is one of the three pillars upon which the world stands. As Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, states, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, on three things the world stands: on justice, on truth, and on peace. As it says in Zechariah, speak the truth with one another, and in your gates judge with truth, justice, and peace. Now, it's all from HaShem, so does going to a doctor go against Divine Providence? The Pasuk says, Rak shivto yitain v'rapo yorapeh. He shall pay for the loss of his work, and he shall provide for healing. From here it is derived that a physician is allowed to heal, and we do not say that since God afflicted the person, it is forbidden to cure him, says the Gemara, the Talmud. The Torah addresses the unfortunate situation where people physically fight with one another, and one causes physical damage to his fellow. The one who inflicted bodily harm is required to make 5 separate payments to the victim as compensation, including the medical costs incurred as a result of the injury. The Gemara says this verse is the source for the permission granted to physicians to practice medicine. If not for this verse, we might have assumed that the Torah forbids practicing medicine, where tending to the ill will help them recover. It is here, in the context of reparations required for bodily harm which one caused, that the Torah indicates to us that doctors indeed may heal ill patients. Rashi on the Gemara explains why we might have thought that practicing medicine is forbidden. God strikes and he heals? In other words, if God decided that a patient should suffer an illness, then we might have thought nobody has the right to oppose God's will by restoring the patient's health and well-being. Once God agreed that somebody should be stricken with an illness and experience pain and discomfort, then what right does a physician or doctor have to try to eliminate the illness? We therefore needed the Torah to explicitly grant permission to practice medicine and heal the sick, to inform us that HaShem in fact wants physicians to help ill patients recover. The Chafetz Chaim raised the question of how Rashi could explain the Gemara's comment this way, in light of the fact that the context of the Gemara's remark is not a natural illness but a physical altercation. The condition requiring medical attention in this verse is not a virus or bacterial infection or a broken bone caused by a fall. It is an injury inflicted by another person. How could Rashi say about such an injury that God struck the patient with his condition? His injury was caused not by an act of God, but by an act of man, by somebody who was fighting with him. Why then would we have thought to forbid curing him, viewing medical attention as an effort to oppose the will of God? The answer is that even an act of man is an act of God. Of course, all people have free will, and someone who assaults his fellow is assuredly held accountable for the harm he inflicted. At the same time, however, HaShem does not allow a person to inflict harm on another person unless he decided that, for whatever reason, the victim should suffer this harm. Indeed, if an injury caused by aggravated assault can be described as HaShem striking the victim, because HaShem allowed or even orchestrated it to happen. Everything that happens to us is Hashem's will. If somebody wrongs us, that person, of course, is held accountable, but we must recognize that we suffered this harm only because Hashem decided it should happen. And therefore, instead of allowing our anger and rage to fester, we should instead humbly turn to Hashem and introspect in an effort to improve and be worthy of His kindness and protection. Once we realize that everything is from Hashem, we will react to adversity not with anger, but by appealing to Hashem and by striving to grow. Now, theft of animals. Ki yignov ish shor oseh utavocha umachore. Chamisha v'akar. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Said Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, God is considerate of a person's dignity. For an ox which the thief leads on foot and is not thereby degraded, he pays 5-fold. But for a sheep which the thief had to carry on his shoulders, he pays only 4 times its value, since he was degraded by it. Also, said Rabbi Meir, see how valuable work is. For an ox whose theft deprived the owner of its labor, the thief pays 5-fold. But for the theft of a sheep which caused no such loss of labor, he pays only 4 times. That's Mechilta Rashi. Now, normal and abnormal damage. So v'chi yegof shor ish es shor reyehu, v'chotzu es kaspo. If a man's ox gores his fellow's ox, they shall divide the money. Goring is not normal behavior for an ox, so the owner pays only half damages, unless this ox has gored 3 times in the past, in which case he pays full damages. On the other hand, eating and trampling is common behavior for an ox, which the owner should have anticipated, so for such damage he must pay full compensation, says the Gemara. Now, the importance of Emunah, faith and integrity. According to the Ramban Nachmanides, there seems to be a link between the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments, and the monetary laws recorded in Parshas Mishpatim. And that is why they were given together to Klal Israel, to the people of Israel. Rav Moshe Feinstein suggests that one who acts unscrupulously in monetary matters is not only transgressing mitzvos bein Adam lechavero, commandments between a man and his fellow, rather he is denying in a sense the very existence of God. He is kofer be'ikar, a complete denier. If a person were to fully internalize the reality that his livelihood comes from a Kodesh Baruch Hu and from God, and his yearly income is predetermined on Rosh Hashanah, the new year, he would never violate a halacha or rule related to monetary matters, because he would realize that no financial gain will ever come from such behavior. It is only because a person thinks that his strength and his intelligence, kochi v'otzem yodi, brings him success, that he engages in unfair business practices, he cheats and steals, and acts dishonestly. He refuses to give his fair share of tzedakah or charity, and he is insensitive to the feelings of the convert, the widow, and the orphan. In a real sense, both a lack of integrity in monetary matters and a lack of concern for a fellow Jew stem from a lack of faith in Hashem. Rav Moshe adds that this idea can help explain the comments of the sages about the vav of ve'elu hamishpatim, the first word. What the sages meant to say is not simply that the Vav implies that the monetary mitzvahs of Parshas Mishpatim were also given at Sinai, just like the Aseret Dibros, but rather that the mitzvahs of Parshas Mishpatim were given immediately after the Aseret Dibros to demonstrate that there is a crucial connection between the two. The Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments, begin with the mitzvah to believe in HaShem, Anochi HaShem Elokecha, and the prohibition of Avodah Zorah or idol worship. By juxtaposing the monetary rules of Parshas Mishpatim with the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments, the Torah is teaching that having a proper sense of Emunah in HaShem, or faith in HaShem, can protect a person from financial impropriety or any other violation of mitzvos bein Adam lechaveiro, mitzvos between commandments between man and his fellow. So, after its discussion of civil law in Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah makes reference to the mitzvahs of Shemitah and Shabbos, because both of these mitzvahs are designed to strengthen our emunah in HaShem and to reinforce the notion that HaShem is in control of a person's financial well-being. We rest every 7 days and abstain from working Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, every 7 years to show that we understand we are not in control. So taking a break from work will not affect our bottom line, in fact. By concluding its discussion of civil law with the mitzvahs of Shemitah and Shabbos, the Torah is giving a subtle hint that internalizing the message of Shemitah and Shabbos, having a proper sense of Emunah or faith in HaShem, should naturally lead a person to act with greater integrity and sensitivity in his business practices as well. In fact, the first question we are asked when we pass on from this world is, Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Did you demonstrate by your actions, thoughts, and speech throughout your life that you had faith in HaShem? In other words, that you acted, thought, and spoke with the full knowledge and constant awareness that He, God, was watching every single action you did, even in private. Now, finally, Parshas Shekalim. This Shabbos was Parshas Shekalim, which recounts the Torah commandment to contribute an annual levy which went towards maintenance of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and later the temple. The Torah specifically obligated the donation of a half shekel coin. Rav Shlomo Alkabet says the lesson is that we are each to see ourselves as only half and incomplete without our fellow Jew. We can consider ourselves whole only when we are harmoniously bonded with one another. The ideal Jewish life is not a life in some remote, deserted region where one can spend his day praying and learning, avoiding temptations and avoiding sin by avoiding all human interaction. This is not what the Torah wants, and this is not the way a person attains wholeness or spiritual perfection. The ideal Jewish life is different Jews living together, engaging with one another, building connections with one another, as difficult and complicated as this often is, while maintaining peace and harmony. When Haman approached Achashverosh to ask for permission to eradicate the Jews, he described the Jews as the one nation that is scattered and dispersed among the nations. He was indicating that the Jews were not unified. They were divided into different groups that did not get along with one another, that disliked and resented each other, and so they deserved annihilation. Our nation's disunity is what exposed us to danger in the first place. The antidote to Haman's plan was Esther's instruction to Mordechai to bring the Jews together, to restore Achdus, unity, to eliminate division and strife between the various groups. This is how the Jews were spared from Haman's scheme, by repairing the rifts, bridging the gaps, and coming together in unity. For this reason, the Gemara points to the mitzvah of the half shekel contribution as the means by which the Jews earned protection from Haman. We become worthy of protection through Achdus, unity, by remembering that we are only half, that we need to connect with all our fellow Jews in order to become whole. This process of joining together with the rest of Klal Yisrael, the nation of Israel, is the secret to our survival, the indispensable weapon we need to protect ourselves against Haman and all those who threaten us. And that's Parshas Mishpatim. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week, God willing, for Parshas Terumah, which is all about building the tabernacle. Until then, have a great week. Shalom.